And welcome everybody. My name is Michael Hoyt. I am a social worker with the City of Edmonton. And my primary role is the engagement of men and boys in gender-based violence prevention. But I'm working way upstream in a primary prevention approach. So my goal is to create opportunities to build healthy men and boys in our community. So I want to share with you a bit of my experience on that journey and where it led me to take. Specifically with respect to finding out about elders in our community. So it was around near the end of 2018, a settlement worker asked me to come talk to a group of newcomers to Canada about resolving parent-teen conflict. The families were from Africa and Asia, and my presentation was to highlight the rights and responsibilities of teenagers and parents in Canada. Now, my wife has asked me to reminded me to tell you all that I have no firsthand experience about parenting to draw on. I'm not a parent. So what I do to prepare for all my presentations, a little bit for this one as well, I turned to Google. I researched adolescent development. I looked up effective parenting practices. I read bits of the Child, Youth, and Family Enhancement Act, and I boned up on the evidence-based practices on how families work together. I learned just enough to get through the presentation. But I adore these opportunities to talk with other cultural groups because they have so much to teach us about how to live in community. And I have mainly book learning to offer them. We get through the presentation and we get to the Q&A part of the part, and I get to ask the first question. So I turn around and I say, where would you turn to find culturally relevant ways to deal with parent-teen conflict? Remember, I'm a Google kind of a guy. A Somali high school student raises her hand and she says, well, we consult our elders. But now we have arrived in Edmonton. Our elders are spread out across the city, and I don't have a chance to develop a personal relationship with them. Then she looked back at me and turned the conversation to me, asking, well, who are your elders? Dead silence in my head, except for some panicked internal questions. How come I don't know my elders? And is Google my elder? Does every other culture except mine know its elders? And why do I feel panicked and missing out on something important? So let me identify myself a little bit further. I'm a 66-year-old white male of Northern European ancestry. Well, as you can see, I'm gray-haired, and I still demonstrate some self-directed bias against old people. I think this ageism stops me from seeing my elders. The student's question and what I've learned from hanging out at Men's Sheds meetings has cleared my vision a bit. I want to share that experience with you. Now, Men's Sheds Edmonton is a nonprofit organization that builds and promotes casual spaces for men to connect, create, and socialize. In other words, we get guys together to tinker, tell stories, and just hang out for fun. I sat on the board. It was at a board meeting that I got a fix on the practice of eldering. Now, Brian Sawyer, and I hope Brian's here tonight, was one of the board members, and he explained it to me. Brian has worked with the Mankind Project, a personal development org that recognizes the role of eldership. But he told me about the work of elders could apply to work with any gender, but I'm going to focus my language on men. So please be mindful that I believe this could be generalized to include all genders. Now, Brian explained that the role of the elder is to hold space while men work on projects or on themselves and make sure the men are safe in these spaces. And their job is not to provoke or to challenge or to lead, but it's to check in on people and help them become fit for purpose of their own devising. He added, these men who take on eldering roles have come to a time in their lives when they're not concerned about acquiring power or wealth or social esteem. They're not there to enhance themselves. They come to the group of men with open hearts. They're willing to share or offer an opinion, but they're not there to give advice. Now, do you think that young student mentioned earlier would recognize our elders from this description? Except for the specific mention of men, this sounds to me like it could be universal. Now, last night, after listening to the presentations by Wes, Salvi, Clint, and the others, the following description of elders ran through my head like an earworm for most of the night. Elders are there to remind young men that they are not, they're there to remind young men that they are okay and enough just being themselves. Elders are not perfect men, but men with wounds that have healed to become scars, and their scars help tell a story that encourage and inspire and give strength to younger men. Now, these elders are willing to share these stories. The scars signify healing can and does take place. These elders see what's remarkable about others, and they convey to them that they're all worthwhile. I heard that clearly last night in those presentations. Last evening, I also dwelled hard on the value of showing and discussing our scars as a sign of healing. But there was another aspect of eldering that played through my head after last evening. It's called the activity theory of aging. And I think Clint Malarchuk was all about activity. Let's discuss its opposite for a moment, disengagement. I lost track of my elders through disengagement. Disengagement emphasizes the societal need to remove its elders from their previous roles to pave the way for the younger and presumably more able generation to take over these roles. You've heard the expression, okay, boomer, so have I. Well, we put old people out to pasture. Now, most men join the workforce outside the home for 40 years or so. When we're no longer fit for purpose and reach retirement age, the community sends us out to pasture, or we head there on our own. Removed from the social network that was our workplace, we don't have tons of experience keeping busy. We probably don't know about taking on the role of eldering, as described to me by Brian. Maybe we know how to walk the dog or care for the grandchildren, do stuff around the house, take on a hobby, take a travel adventure. Maybe we do have coffee with our friends. But worse, our investment in these activities even dwindles as the aging process slides on. We turn old people out to pasture. Men don't transition as well as women. Lucky the man that has a woman in his life acting as a social convener. Consider this. When I was born, the average North American male retired at 68 and died at 69. That's a short time to be in the pasture. You'd barely have time to walk around before you were pushing up the daisies. Now, today, the life expectancy for a male in Canada is 80 years, and retirement is back down to 65 years. So if you do the arithmetic, this ends up to be an average of 15 years of standing in the pasture. And life expectancy increases all the time. Those born today, if retirement still is at 65 when they reach that age, could be standing in the pasture for 30 years. Now, disengagement theory assumes that all societies must find ways for older people's authority to give way to younger people. A society that thus encourages its elderly to take on roles more appropriate to their physical and mental decline. Sorry, that's what they want us to do. They want us to stand aside, boomer. Now, what can we learn from these elders who've been out on the workforce but continue to thrive? I imagine they've learned to redefine their lives. If these happen to be men, they've climbed out of the man box and moved beyond stereotypical cultural expectations about how to be a man. They're not into or focused on being strong, tough, competitive, in charge. And in fact, it becomes hard to live up to those roles as time moves on. An active elder has begun to reinterpret these expectations about how to be a man. It's probably changed his ideas of what masculinity means and maybe begun to emphasize that men can be nurturing, mindful of the connectedness of all things, and our responsibility to protect the world for future generations. The sociologists call this model of aging the activity theory. And activity is a competing idea to disengagement. The activity theory of aging assumes that elders must remain active to enhance their physical and mental health. Older people benefit themselves and society if they continue to be active. And our responsibility as we age, according to activity theory, is to ensure that we are reflecting in our wisdom and sharing back to those who come behind us. Now, in 2011, I was given an assignment at the city that brought disengagement and activity theory into clear contrast for me. I was asked to conduct a review of the men's services in Edmonton to look at the community's capacity to provide support and wellness services to men. And around the same time, about 150 people escaped injury when the snow-covered roof of a senior center collapsed in North Edmonton. This pushed the senior center staff to relocate to the office where I was working. The senior center staff followed my work with interest. Maggie, the ED, was always asking, what's happening for older men in Edmonton, Michael? I'd say, well, Maggie, not much. Men don't easily reach out for support from service providers. I didn't explain this to her, she knew this. Women step out to attend social and educational programs, plug into adult learning classes in the healthcare system, and lead active lives outside the home. Men do this with much less enthusiasm. And so service provision caters more to women than men. Now here's my tepid experience with disengagement, courtesy of the Northeast Senior Center staff. On my 56th birthday, the staff took me to Zeller's cafeteria for lunch, wild bunch they were, and they'd invited me to buy pajamas using my new seniors discount. They wanted to prepare me for my retirement, they said. This was not a hard sell to make. As I've already mentioned, I possessed a good amount of self-inflicted ageism. I blame my age when I stumbled or forgot things. I thought of my retirement as the final act of being an adult with nothing to follow. My retirement was still years off, but I thought it'd be the end of my productive community work. Senior staff were teasing me, mostly, but they wanted to remind me that our culture expects to put our elderly out to pasture. The senior staff spurred me to look harder for ways to support older men. And here's how I moved into line with activity theory. I completed a lit review for my men's services assignment, and my attention was drawn to a grassroots movement that encouraged men to look after themselves, their families, and communities. This was an early look at what we now call non-programmatic intervention strategies. The idea was to go places where men naturally gather and enhance those environments to entice men into new pro-social behaviors, like mentoring, health seeking, building social networks, and leading for positive change in their communities. A movement out of Australia really grabbed my attention. Here, older men practiced and shared their knowledge about how to do stuff and support each other while benefiting their communities. Now I'm talking about men's shedders, not the cheese, but the guys who hang out in men's sheds. Most sheds are sites of informal learning that encourage older men to share skills, knowledge, and wisdom. Now, the Irish Men's Shed conducted research into what sheds do, and they concluded that men's sheds facilitate sensitive conversations between older men as they actively reconstruct masculine behaviors and identities in later life. In fact, in other words, they do eldering. Now, the earliest sheds opened in the 1980s, and by the time I caught on, sheds were in the thousands operating down under in Australia, and they were spreading across the world. The first one started in Canada in Winnipeg around 2011, and the founder, Doug Mackey, recognized that men in his community had both time on their hands and a tendency to suffer from isolation, loneliness, and depression, a consequence of ageism on top of stereotypical masculine socialization, what I was already discovering for myself. I personally wanted men's sheds in Edmonton, and I knew that my ageist beliefs were going to make retirement difficult for me. And I don't have a rich source of friends outside of work. If you look at my social work practice, if you took my social work practice away, I'm not sure what I'd do, because my extracurricular activities just include more social work. I want to meet active guys interested in building things and growing themselves. And I want to find a safe and friendly space to meet guys whose interest in personal development and looking after their community matches mine. Now I know how to talk up ideas in hopes of finding, or their hope of them falling onto fertile ground. So I just began talking. And somehow these stories got back to Punch Jackson, a much respected retired civil servant whose experience includes community recreation development. The seeds had already fallen and taken root on him, and he was in the activity camp. I met Punch in a coffee shop. With a smile and a handshake, he asked me, what are we going to do to make sheds happen in Edmonton? He knows the work of an elder. He included me in that and was right on board with helping me to be part of a broader vision to help the community. Now, he'd already talked to members of the city council and the executive director of a large senior service agency. Punch knows when to press down on an issue. He knows when to ask questions, and he knows when to let something go. His energy and know-how has been a catalyst to many regional shed startups. And he's also inspired the development of a regional association to support their growth. That's the Men's Sheds Edmonton, and I'll give you some information at the end here. I'll give you, now Brian, Punch, and others around the board table where we sit practice eldering, and I wanted to talk a bit about that. They all demonstrate a capacity for listening to the needs of others and inviting them into a deep, purposeful conversation. And sometimes they're just damn funny. These elders help me and others find our best selves through a practice of health by stealth. Now, elder wisdom inspires us to look after ourselves, take care of others and the world in a respectful, playful, and collegial way. That comes from the space they maintain around them. I'm misleading if I indicate that elders in the Sheds movement are only men. Women too play an important role. And Amanda, who is less than half as old as our youngest member, that's right, Amanda, reminds us that connectedness to our community and our responsibility to others points to these connections. That's how sheds have found charities that they can support, thanks to Amanda. I want to clarify that shedders don't just hang out in sheds. Our local shedders have built picnic tables and benches for use by charities. They've hosted show and tell days with the elementary school students to teach history. They've collaborated with post-secondary institutions and museums to host presentations on health, environmentalism, and local history. And they've practiced with online technology to visit and learn from shedders in the UK. And they've even hung out in local parks and malls to socialize, have a laugh, and make new friends. I really like this model. It's self-organizing, meeting guys where they naturally like to gather, teaching them health by stealth, and opening spaces for men to find elders in their community. Thanks to them, I want to learn how I can practice eldering. A side note here, I phoned my 90-year-old dad last Sunday after interrupting his Super Bowl game to tell him about this presentation. And he disagreed with most of what I'm sharing with you. He's in his 90s. What does he know, right? Wait, that's disengaging my dad. He didn't like the word elder because it sounds tribal, and he doesn't like organized recreational activities. But he knows how to live life and what's important. He just doesn't know he knows. I've told him about sheds, and he wouldn't want to join one. He likes his men's walking groups. He likes to repair equipment for the collective kitchen at a local church and to help out his family and tired workmates. And a shed by any other name would smell as sweet as that. So here's the advice, finally, that I have accumulated from elders through my experience with sheds. One is listen to your elders' advice. Not because they're always right, but because they've had more experience of being wrong. Becoming older doesn't make us kinder, more giving, or better people. These are things we have to work for at any age, things we must earn, and that's the work that happens in a men's shed. If you're interested in exploring men's sheds for yourself or someone you know, here's the website. Let's see if I can share my screen. Sure, I can do this. There we are. Here's a question, first of all, who are your elders? And I wonder if you can spot them in that group of pictures there. The truth is there's elders in all the pictures. There's eldering going on in every single one of them. I just want to draw your attention to the one in the bottom right-hand corner, which shows, that's Amanda, looking very young there. And what's happened there is we've asked, it's a practice during our board meetings for somebody to bring out something nutritious like pie and ice cream. And Amanda said that she would bring something nutritious and fun to our last board meeting. She said, and she would do it with the condition that we all eat whatever she brought in. So she brought in whale blubber. That's narwhal from her, I think it's her sister who's living up north. So we all had promised and all made a try of eating whale blubber and then talking about the meaning of that and significance. And that's the practice of a true elder, right? To help people to have new experiences and to discuss them and to build community around something new. Here's the address for shedders if you're looking. I can't see, well, I can see it. It's menssshedsyeg.ca. That's with all the S's on men's and sheds and then YEG. If you go to our website, that will connect you to the broader community of shedders in Canada as well. So it's a good place. If you're interested in sheds for yourself or you know somebody that you think might like to follow up on sheds, please share that link with them. And having said that, thank you all. Let's all do good eldering.
Thank you, Michael. Wow, that was great. You know, it's funny chatting with Punch and getting to know some of the guys has been a real honor for me. I love the way you frame that. It really makes you reflect. All right, friends, Michael, thank you again. We are hopping back out into the lobby and I see Dr. John is waiting in his session there. So I will go jump in and I will introduce Dr. John Ogrodnichuk from the University of British Columbia for our final session tonight. So we'll see you over there.